The shuttle docked with a soft hiss, and Kira Vasquez stepped onto Station Valeth 9 with a single bag over her shoulder and nothing else to her name. The air tasted different here, filtered, recycled, stripped of everything that made it feel alive. She had spent 17 years breathing the thick, humid air of Sao Paulo, dodging rainstorms and chasing stray dogs through cracked streets. This place smelled like metal and silence. The docking bay was enormous. Ships from dozens of worlds sat in neat rows, their hulls painted in colors she had no words for. Alien students moved through the space in groups, talking in languages that buzzed and clicked and sang. A few of them noticed her. She saw it in the way their bodies shifted, a step backward, a turn of the head, a widening of eyes or whatever passed for eyes on their faces. She was the only human on the station. The first one the Galactic Concord Academy had ever admitted. Earth's great experiment. One girl sent to prove that humanity deserved a seat among the stars. No pressure. A tall, thin creature with pale blue skin and 4 slender arms approached her at the registration desk. It studied her with large, wet eyes that blinked sideways. "You are the human," it said, "not a question." "Kira Vasquez," she replied. The creature of Velani she remembered from her studies handed her a data card without another word. Dormitory assignment, class schedule, station map, everything she needed to survive printed on a card the size of her palm. Her dormitory was in the lowest wing of the station, far from the grand halls where the children of ambassadors and generals lived. The room was small, with 2 sleep pods built into the wall and a shared washing unit. Her doormate was already there. Selith Tiar sat on her pod with all 4 arms crossed. She was Velani, the same species as the one at the desk, but younger, with bioluminescent patches on her neck that glowed a faint green. She looked at Kira the way someone might look at a strange insect that had crawled onto their plate. "So you are real," Selith said. "I thought they were joking when they told me I would be sharing a room with a Deathworlder." "I am real," Kira said. She set her bag down and began unpacking. There was not much to unpack. A few changes of clothes, a datapad, a worn leather bracelet, and a small holographic projector that, when activated, showed a woman in human military armor, smiling with tired eyes. Selith watched but said nothing about the photo. There was something in the human girl's face when she looked at it, something hard and quiet and very far away, that made Selith decide not to ask. The next morning, the academy held its orientation ceremony in the Grand Hall. Over 1,000 students sat in curved rows that rose toward the ceiling like the inside of a shell. Kira sat in the back. Around her, students from dozens of species whispered and pointed. A group of Krathani, tall, insect-like creatures with armored plates on their arms and glowing marks on their throats, clicked their mandibles and stared at her with open contempt. The academy director, an ancient Velani with dim bioluminescence and a voice like slow water, welcomed the students. He spoke about excellence, about the proud history of the academy, about the honor of serving the Galactic Concord. Then near the end, he added, "This year, we welcome a student from a newly admitted species. The Concord has decided in its wisdom to extend this opportunity. We trust that all students will accommodate this decision." That was it. No name, no welcome, just accommodate. Kira's face did not change. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes steady, her breathing even. If the words hurt, she buried them somewhere deep, in the same place she buried everything else. The first week was the hardest, not because of the classes, those were challenging but manageable. Kira had spent 2 years preparing for this. She had studied alien languages, military history, xenobiology, and tactical theory until her eyes bled. The hard part was everything else. Nobody sat next to her in the dining hall. When she walked through the corridors, students moved to the other side. A Krathani student bumped her shoulder deliberately and called her soft flesh in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. His friends laughed, a sharp, clicking sound like stones being struck together. Kira walked on. She did not respond. She did not flinch. She simply walked, steady and straight, as if she had not heard them at all. This confused them. They had expected anger or fear or tears. They got nothing. And nothing, it turned out, was harder to deal with than anything. In her quiet moments, Kira explored the station. She memorized the corridors, the exits, the distances between rooms. She noted the environmental controls, temperature, gravity, atmosphere mix. She studied the other students the way a biologist studies animals in the wild, watching their habits, their social structures, their weaknesses. She did this without thinking about it. It was how she was built. It was how all humans were built, though the galaxy did not understand that yet. On the fifth night, Selith came back to their room and found Kira sitting on her pod, staring at her class schedule on the datapad. The screen cast a blue glow across her face. "You have combat theory tomorrow," Selith said carefully, "with Instructor Kaelsar." "I know. He is Crethani, one of the most decorated soldiers in the Conquered. He has killed," Selith hesitated. "He has fought in many battles." "I know who he is," Kira said. There was something in her voice that made Selith stop. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something older than both, something patient and cold, like stone that had been worn smooth by years of water. Kira turned off the datapad and lay back in her pod. She stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, the holographic photo of her mother glowed faintly on the shelf beside her. A woman in armor, smiling, alive, frozen forever in a moment before everything went wrong. Kira closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would sit in a classroom and learn about war from the creature who had taken her mother from her. She would sit, and she would listen, and she would not say a word. But she would remember everything. The combat theory lecture hall was built like an arena. Rows of seats rose steeply around a central stage, and above the stage floated a massive holographic display that could project entire battlefields in sharp, glowing detail. 200 students filled the seats, Crethani, Velani, Gorath, and a dozen other species, all watching the stage with the eager attention of children waiting for a show. An instructor, Vreth Kaelsar, gave them a show. He walked onto the stage like he owned it. He was enormous, over 7 feet tall, with a body covered in dark chitin plates that clicked softly when he moved. His arms were thick and armored, ending in four-fingered hands that could crush bone. His throat pulsed with bioluminescent markings that shifted color with his mood, currently a confident, steady gold. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the hall without effort, "to the only class that matters." The students laughed. Vreth smiled, or did something with his mandibles that passed for a smile. He began his lecture with what he called the species hierarchy of combat, a ranking of the galaxy's species by their military capability. He used historical battles as examples, projecting them in vivid holographic detail above the stage. Ships burning in the vacuum of space, ground forces clashing on alien soil, cities falling. He praised the Crethani naturally. "My people were born for war," he said, tapping his chest plate with a sound like a drum. "Our armor is natural. Our reflexes are faster than most species can think. We do not break." He dismissed the Velani as useful for writing treaties after the real work is done. He called the Gorath strong but slow, like boulders that dream of being soldiers. The students from those species shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Vreth was too famous, too decorated, too powerful to challenge. Then he got to humans. The holographic display changed. It showed a small planet, blue and green, wrapped in white clouds, Earth, Kira's home. It floated above the stage like a jewel, and Vreth looked at it the way someone might look at a dead insect. "Humans," he said, and the word dripped from his mouth like something rotten. "The galaxy's newest curiosity, a Class 12 Deathworld species, impressive in the way that a disease is impressive, hard to kill, but ultimately insignificant." Scattered laughter. Vreth waved his hand and the holographic display shifted again. Now it showed a human settlement, prefabricated buildings on a dusty, windswept plain, a colony, a frontier outpost. 12 years ago. Before the ceasefire, the Crethani expansion fleet conducted operations along the border of human-claimed space. I was there. He said it casually, like a man mentioning a vacation he once took. The humans fought, I will give them that. They screamed and they bled and they fired their primitive weapons until the barrels melted, but they broke. He paused for effect, letting his throat markings pulse a brighter gold. They always broke. The display showed combat footage, shaky, chaotic images of a nighttime battle, explosions, running figures, the distant sound of human voices shouting in fear and pain. Kira recognized the settlement layout immediately. Prefab barracks in a grid pattern, a communications tower in the center, a perimeter wall that had been torn open on the eastern side. Outpost Meridian 7. She knew it before he said the name. She had studied the reports. She had read the casualty lists. She had memorized every detail because that was where her mother had died, fighting in the dark against enemies she could barely see. I personally led the third assault wave, Vreth continued. He was enjoying himself. She could see it in the way his markings brightened, the way his mandibles twitched with satisfaction. The human soldiers were brave, I suppose, in the way that small animals are brave when cornered, but bravery is not enough when you are soft. He held up one armored hand, turning it slowly in the light. I carry their dents as decoration. The class laughed again, louder this time. Kira sat in the back row. She had not moved since the lecture began. Her hands rested flat on the desk in front of her, her fingers spread, her body perfectly still. Her face showed nothing, no anger, no pain, no fear. To anyone watching, she looked bored. Selith, sitting 2 rows ahead, glanced back. She saw Kira's hands. The knuckles were white. The tendons stood out like cables beneath the skin. Selith felt something cold move through her body, though she could not have explained why. Vreth noticed Kira. Of course he did. She was the only human in the room, and he had been building to this moment since he walked onto the stage. "Ah," he said, pointing at her with one long, armored finger. "Our visiting specimen, stand-up human." Kira stood, slowly, smoothly, like water rising. "Tell me," Vreth said, his mandibles clicking with amusement, "does your species even teach combat? Or do you simply die in creative ways and call it strategy?" The room erupted. Laughter bounced off the walls. Students slapped their desks, clicked their mandibles, and flashed their bioluminescent markings in alien expressions of joy. Kira waited. She stood with her arms at her sides, her weight balanced, her eyes fixed on Vreth. When the laughter faded, she spoke. "Which outpost?" Vreth tilted his head. "What?" "You said you led an assault. Which outpost?" He blinked, a slow, sideways motion of his secondary eyelids. "Outpost Meridian 7, a forgettable place." "And the commanding officer, do you remember the name?" Vreth waved a hand dismissively. "Humans all look the same to me. Does it matter?" "Commander Elena Vasquez," Kira said. Her voice was steady, flat, like a blade laid on a table. "She held the eastern wall for 7 hours with 32 soldiers against your third wave. Your reports listed 109 Crethani casualties before the wall fell." The room went quiet. Vreth's throat markings flickered, a brief shift from gold to something darker. "She was my mother," Kira said. The silence was total. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Kira sat down. Vreth stared at her for a long moment. Then he forced a laugh, a harsh, clicking sound, and turned back to his lecture. "Sentiment," he said. "The human weakness." He continued teaching, but something had shifted. His voice was slightly louder than before, his gestures slightly bigger, as if he was trying to fill a space that had suddenly become too large. After class, the students filed out in unusual silence. Selith found Kira in the corridor, walking toward the dormitory wing with her bag over her shoulder. "Kira," Selith said, "are you?" I am fine. He was there when you're. I know what he did. Selith stopped. She watched Kira walk away, steady, straight, unhurried, like she was walking towards something, not away from it. That night Kira sat in her pod with the lights off. The holographic photo of her mother glowed on the shelf. Elena Vasquez, in full armor, smiling, alive. Kira looked at it for a long time. Then she opened her datapad. She pulled up every file she could find on Vreth Kaelsar. His service record, his combat decorations, his published tactical writings. She pulled up Krethani physiology databases, skeletal structure, nerve cluster locations, joint flexibility ranges, visual processing speeds, chitin density maps. She read for hours, she took notes, she memorized. Outside, the stars turned slowly past the station's viewport, cold and patient and endless. Inside, a 17-year-old girl from a broken planet studied the body of the creature who killed her mother, and she did not stop until she knew him better than he knew himself. In the weeks that followed, Kira Vasquez changed. Not in any way that most people could see. She still sat alone in the dining hall, still walked the corridors with her single bag and her quiet face, still spoke only when spoken to. But something beneath the surface had shifted, like a river changing direction underground, and the effects began to show in ways that nobody expected. It started with the exams. Combat theory was not just about fighting. It covered tactics, logistics, military history, species analysis, and strategic planning. Vreth Kaelsar designed his exams to be brutal, multi-layered problems that required students to think across disciplines and species boundaries. Most students struggled. The best scored in the high 70s. Kira scored 98 on the first exam, 96 on the second, 100 on the third. Vreth marked her papers harshly. He deducted points for formatting, for word choice, for answers that were technically correct but lacked elegance. It did not matter. Kira was so far ahead of the other students that even with his penalties, she sat at the top of every ranking. He stopped calling on her in class. She had taken that weapon from him. Every time he had tried to embarrass her with a difficult question, she had answered it perfectly, calmly, without hesitation. The other students had begun to notice. They no longer laughed when Vreth mentioned humans. Then came the physical assessments. The academy tested students in a wide range of physical capabilities: speed, strength, endurance, reflexes, environmental adaptation. Each species had different strengths. The Krethani were fast and armored. The Goreth were impossibly strong. The Velani were agile and precise. Nobody knew what to expect from a human. The first surprise came during the endurance run. The course was a 5-kilometer track that looped through varying gravity zones and atmospheric conditions. Most species completed it in 15 to 20 minutes. The Krethani students finished in 12, their chitin-plated legs driving them forward with mechanical efficiency. Kira finished in 14 minutes, respectable but not exceptional. The Krethani students clicked their mandibles in amusement. Then, while they bent over gasping and flexing their joints, Kira kept running. She ran the course again, and again, and again. After 2 hours, the monitoring instructor, a bewildered Velani, asked her to stop. Kira was barely breathing hard. Her heart rate was elevated but steady. She was sweating, a biological response that disgusted most alien species but served as an incredibly efficient cooling system. She could have kept going for hours. The Krethani students were not laughing anymore. In the strength tests, Kira matched the mid-tier Goreth students in grip strength, a feat that should have been impossible for a creature her size. A Goreth student named Dorvak Thenes, a massive figure with stone-gray skin and gentle eyes, watched her crush the testing device and quietly said, "Interesting." In the environmental hazard simulations, chambers that replicated toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, high radiation, and low oxygen, Kira adapted faster than students whose species had evolved specifically for those conditions. When a Vellani instructor asked how she survived a simulation that dropped the oxygen level to 7%, Kira shrugged and said, "Humans climb mountains higher than that for fun." The instructor did not know what a mountain was. When she looked it up later, she was horrified. Word spread. In the library, in the corridors, in the quiet spaces between classes, students began talking about the human, not with fear exactly, but with a new kind of attention. The jokes about soft flesh grew less frequent. Something was happening that the galaxy's comfortable assumptions about humanity could not explain. Dorvek approached Kira one evening in the library. He was nearly 3 times her size, but he moved carefully, as if afraid of breaking the furniture. He sat across from her and placed a datapad on the table. "I have been reading about your species," he said. "I found something called persistence hunting. Is it real?" Kira looked up from her notes. "It is real. Your ancestors chased animals across open ground, not by being faster, not by being stronger, just by not stopping. The animal would sprint ahead, then rest. Your ancestors would follow. The animal would sprint again. Your ancestors would follow again, for hours, for days, until the animal's body simply gave up." "That is correct." Dorvak was quiet for a moment. His stone-like face was hard to read, but something flickered in his deep-set eyes. "That is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard," he said. Kira almost smiled, almost. "We are very patient," she said. Selith and Kira's friendship grew slowly, like a plant in low light. Selith asked questions about Earth, careful, cautious questions, and Kira answered them honestly. She told Selith about the oceans, which covered 70% of the planet and contained creatures that could swallow a shuttle whole. She told her about the weather, hurricanes that could flatten cities, lightning that split the sky, winters that froze the ground solid for months. She told her about the bacteria, the viruses, the parasites, the venomous animals, the poisonous plants. Selith listened with all 4 hands pressed against her mouth. "Your planet is trying to kill you," she whispered, "every single day." "Yes," Kira said simply, "that is why we are the way we are." Meanwhile, Vreth Kaelser was losing control, and he knew it. The human girl was supposed to be a joke, a political stunt, a fragile creature he could use to demonstrate the superiority of real warrior species. Instead, she was dismantling his authority one perfect exam score at a time. He pushed harder. He assigned Kira extra simulations, scenarios designed to be impossible. She completed them. He publicly criticized her combat form in front of the class, pointing out every tiny flaw. She corrected each one by the next session. He loaded her with additional readings, reports, and tactical analyses, enough work to bury 3 students. She did it all without complaint, without error, without expression. And that was what bothered him most. He could handle defiance. He had broken defiant students before. He could handle fear. Fear was natural and useful. But Kira gave him nothing. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes, and there was no anger, no respect, no hatred, no admiration. There was nothing. It was like staring into deep water and seeing no bottom. The breaking point came during the semester's live tactical simulation, a competitive war game exercise held in the station's massive training complex. Students were divided into teams and given objectives to complete against each other. It was the most important assessment of the term. Vreth assigned the teams himself. He gave Kira the weakest squad, 3 Vellani students who had never scored above average and a single Gorath who was known more for his poetry than his fighting. He placed them in the worst starting position on the map, and he gave them an objective that was, by any reasonable calculation, impossible to achieve. The exercise began at dawn and was expected to last 8 hours. It lasted 19. Kira did not try to win through force. She did not charge toward the objective. Instead, she kept her team moving, constantly, changing direction, setting false trails, avoiding engagement, circling back. She used every piece of terrain, every shadow, every environmental variable. Her team ate while walking. They rested in shifts of 15 minutes. They never stopped. The opposing teams, larger, stronger, better equipped, burned through their energy trying to find her. The Krethani-led team, favorites to win, pushed hard for the first 10 hours and then began to slow. By hour 14, they were exhausted. By hour 17, they were making mistakes. By hour 19, their captain, a proud Krethani who had never lost a simulation, surrendered. Kira's team had won by simply refusing to stop. The academy buzzed for days. Students who had ignored Kira now watched her with new eyes. Instructors discussed her performance in private meetings. Even the conquered officials who monitored the academy took notice. Vreth took notice too, but not in the way the others did. He cornered her in a corridor 3 days later, his massive body blocking the path, his throat markings pulsing an angry red. "You think you have proven something, human?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You have proven nothing. A simulation is not war. I have killed things stronger than you with my bare hands." Kira looked up at him. The top of her head barely reached his chest. She did not step back. She did not look away. She studied him the way she studied everything, carefully, completely, without hurry. "I know exactly what you have killed, instructor," she said quietly. Then she stepped around him and walked away. Vreth stood in the empty corridor. His throat markings flickered erratically, shifting through colors he could not control. Something cold had settled in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in decades of warfare across 12 star systems. He did not recognize it at first, because he had never felt it before. It was doubt. Every semester, the Academy held a combat demonstration, a formal event where instructors showcased fighting techniques using volunteer students. Dignitaries came from across the Concord to watch. Military officials, ambassadors, and representatives from dozens of worlds filled the grand amphitheater in their finest ceremonial attire. It was equal parts education and entertainment, and it was the most watched event in the Academy's calendar. Vreth Kaelser had been the star of the demonstration for 9 consecutive years. He would select a student, spar with them in controlled conditions, and use the match to illustrate combat principles. The students were never expected to win. The point was to watch the master at work. Vreth was careful, precise, and devastating. He made it look effortless. The crowd loved him. This year he announced something different. He would demonstrate cross-species combat superiority, a live sparring match against any student willing to volunteer. No restrictions on species. Full contact within safety parameters. He framed it as an educational opportunity. Everyone knew who he was targeting. The night before the demonstration, Selith sat on her pod and watched Kira prepare. The human girl was stretching, slow, deliberate movements that bent her body in ways Selith found slightly alarming. Humans were disturbingly flexible. "You cannot do this," Selith said. "He will hurt you. The demonstration rules protect the instructor. He can use full force, and the medical team will only intervene if your life is at risk. That gives him a wide range of damage to work with." "I know the rules," Kira said, touching her toes. "He weighs 200 kilograms more than you. His chitin can stop blade strikes. His reaction time is nearly twice yours. He has fought and killed across 12 systems. You are a student." "I know all of that too." Selith made a sound of frustration, a high, whistling note from her throat. "Then why?" Kira stopped stretching. She sat on the floor and looked at Selith with those dark, still eyes. "I know his species' binocular vision has a processing delay of 0.3 seconds when tracking lateral movement below chest height," she said. "I know that Krethani joints lose 40% of their flexibility when the ambient temperature drops below 18 degrees. The amphitheater's climate system runs at 16. I know the nerve cluster density beneath his 3rd and 7th thoracic plates, and I know that targeted pressure on those points causes involuntary muscle spasms. I know his fighting style from 23 recorded matches. He favors a right-side lunge on his opening move. He drops his left guard after the second strike, and he has never fought an opponent shorter than his shoulder line. She paused. I have been ready for 6 weeks. Seleth stared at her. Across the room, Dorvac, who had come to wish Kira luck, stood frozen in the doorway, his stone-gray face unreadable. Persistence predator, he whispered. The amphitheater was full. Over 3,000 spectators filled the rising rows of seats. Students, faculty, dignitaries, military officials, conquered representatives. Holographic cameras floated above the arena floor, broadcasting to screens across the station and beyond. This was the most anticipated demonstration in years, and everyone knew why. Vreth entered first. He wore ceremonial combat gear, polished chitin plates over his natural armor gleaming in the arena lights. He walked slowly, savoring the attention, his throat markings pulsing a deep, confident gold. The crowd applauded. He raised one armored hand in acknowledgement. Then he stood at the center of the arena and called for a volunteer. Silence. The crowd waited. Students looked at each other, looked at the floor, looked anywhere but at the arena. Then Kira stood. She walked down the steps from the upper rows, wearing nothing but the Academy's standard training uniform, thin fabric, no armor, no protection. She was small against the backdrop of the enormous arena. Her footsteps made no sound. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some students leaned forward. A conquered official turned to his colleague and said, "This will be quick." Kira stepped onto the arena floor. She stood 15 meters from Vreth. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The size difference was almost comical. He was a wall of chitin and muscle, and she was a girl who weighed 60 kilograms on a good day. Vreth's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Brave," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Foolish but brave." The match referee, a neutral Vellani official, raised his hand. "Begin." Vreth lunged. It was his signature opening, a right-side charge closing distance in 2 massive strides, leading with his armored shoulder. It was designed to overwhelm, to crush, to end the fight before it began. He had used it 100 times against 100 opponents, and it had never failed. Kira was not there. She moved left low, fast, below his chest line, below the angle where his binocular vision could track smoothly. Vreth's shoulder hit empty air. His momentum carried him forward. He turned, recalibrated, struck again. She was already somewhere else. The crowd went quiet. Kira did not fight the way Vreth expected. She did not stand her ground. She did not try to match his power or speed. She moved, constantly. Low lateral shifts, sudden direction changes, circling behind him, appearing on his weak side. Every movement was precise. Every step was calculated. She stayed just outside his reach, just inside his frustration. Vreth swung, missed, swung again, missed. His mandibles clicked with growing agitation. His throat markings shifted from gold to orange. 3 minutes passed. 5, 7. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the galaxy's most decorated combat instructor failed to land a single blow on a 17-year-old girl. Kira was not attacking. Not yet. She was watching, reading, waiting. Every missed strike told her something. Every shift of his weight, every twitch of his mandibles, every flicker of his throat markings added data to the map she had built in her mind over 6 weeks of study. She was learning him in real time, and he did not understand what was happening. At the 10-minute mark, Vreth began to slow. The amphitheater's climate system held the temperature at 16 degrees, 2 degrees below the threshold she had identified. His joints were stiffening. His movements, once fluid and explosive, became heavier. His breathing grew louder, a rasping click from deep within his thorax. He was designed for short, brutal engagements. Overwhelming force, applied quickly. That was the Crethani way. They were not built for this, for a fight that would not end, against an opponent who would not stop moving, who would not stand still, who simply refused to be where she was supposed to be. Persistence hunting, applied to single combat. At the 12-minute mark, Kira struck. It was not a dramatic blow. It was not a powerful hit. It was a precise, open-palmed strike to the gap between Vreth's third and fourth thoracic plates, exactly where she knew the nerve cluster sat, exactly where the chitin was thinnest. Vreth flinched. A small, involuntary spasm ran through his left side. She struck again, different spot, same precision, the nerve cluster beneath his seventh plate, his left leg buckled for a fraction of a second. The crowd gasped. Vreth roared. The sound shook the arena, a deep, thunderous vibration that made the air tremble. He swung wildly, abandoning technique, abandoning strategy, driven by something primal and desperate. He was no longer fighting a demonstration match. He was fighting for his pride, his reputation, his identity as a killer, as a conqueror, as the thing that other species feared. Kira sidestepped the charge. She hooked her foot behind his leading ankle, a simple, ancient technique that human children learned in schoolyard fights, and Vreth's own momentum did the rest. He crashed to the arena floor. The impact shook the amphitheater. Dust rose in a cloud around his body. Before he could rise, Kira was on him. One hand pressed into the nerve junction beneath his jaw, the Crethani paralysis point that she had studied in diagrams, in medical texts, in anatomical databases, night after night in her small dormitory pod. Her other hand braced against his thoracic plate, holding him down with leverage rather than strength. Vreth could not move. His body had locked, every muscle frozen, his bioluminescent throat flickering wildly between colors, red, white, purple, black, a Crethani distress signal that no one in the arena had ever seen from him before. The amphitheater was silent. 3,000 beings held their breath. Kira leaned close. Her lips were near the side of his head, where the Crethani auditory membrane was thinnest. She spoke quietly, so quietly that only he could hear. Outpost Meridian 7, Commander Elena Vasquez. She held the eastern wall for 7 hours. She killed 39 of your soldiers before she fell. She was my mother. Vreth's eyes, all 4 of them were wide, frozen, staring at nothing. She did not break easily, Kira whispered, and neither did I. She released him, she stood, she stepped back. Vreth lay on the arena floor. He did not get up. His throat markings dimmed to a faint, trembling gray, the Crethani color of surrender. For 3 seconds there was nothing, no sound, no movement, the universe held still. Then Dorvac stood. His massive stone hands came together with a sound like thunder. Selith rose beside him, her bioluminescent patches blazing white, the Villani expression of awe. One by one, row by row, the amphitheater erupted. Students, faculty, dignitaries, beings from dozens of worlds who had never agreed on anything rose to their feet and filled the arena with sound. Kira stood alone on the arena floor. She did not smile. She did not raise her hands. She breathed in, breathed out, and looked at the place where Vreth lay broken not in body, but in everything he had believed about himself and about the soft, fragile, insignificant creatures from the little blue world. In the dignitary section, a conquered official quietly opened a file on his datapad. He deleted the old title, Humanity, Provisional Assessment, and typed a new one. Humanity, Threat Reassessment Priority Alpha. The footage reached every corner of the galaxy within 6 hours. Someone in the amphitheater had recorded the entire match on a personal device and uploaded it to the public networks before the Academy could control the narrative. By the time the station's communications office realized what was happening, the video had been copied, shared, translated, and analyzed by billions of beings on thousands of worlds. The galaxy had watched a 17-year-old human girl dismantle the most decorated combat instructor in the Conquered, and it could not stop talking about it. Military analysts from 12 species published breakdowns of Kira's technique. They studied her footwork, her timing, her knowledge of Crethani physiology. A retired Goreth general called it the most sophisticated application of species-specific tactical exploitation I have seen in 40 years of service. A Velani combat theorist wrote a paper titled Endurance as Weapon, the Human Paradigm, that became the most downloaded academic publication of the quarter. The political consequences moved even faster. Within 3 days of the match, the Galactic Concord opened a formal investigation into instructor Vreth Kaelser. His years of boasting in the lecture hall, his proud, detailed stories of killing human soldiers during the border conflicts, had been recorded by the Academy's own archival systems. What he had treated as war stories, the Concord's legal office now treated as evidence. The ceasefire agreement between the Crethani expansion fleet and the human frontier colonies had included strict terms about the conduct of hostilities. Vreth's accounts of his actions at Outpost Meridian 7 and other engagements suggested violations, deliberate targeting of medical facilities, execution of wounded personnel, destruction of civilian shelters. He had confessed to these things openly, proudly, in front of hundreds of students, because he had never imagined that anyone would care about the deaths of a few humans. He was wrong. Vreth was stripped of his teaching position on the 4th day. His combat decorations were suspended pending review. He was confined to quarters and informed that he would face a formal tribunal within the month. The Academy tried to manage the situation quietly, but quiet was no longer possible. The story had grown beyond the station, beyond the Academy, beyond the Concord's ability to control. On Earth, the footage played on every screen. In the frontier colonies, human settlers who had lived under the shadow of Crethani aggression for over a decade watched a girl from Sao Paulo stand over the fallen body of their enemy, and they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt proud. Kira did not feel proud. She felt tired. The days after the demonstration were a blur of attention she did not want. Students who had ignored her for months now approached her in corridors, wanting to talk, wanting to congratulate her, wanting to be seen near her. Interview requests arrived from media outlets across 30 systems. The Academy's administration summoned her for meetings, polite, careful conversations in which officials who had barely acknowledged her existence now called her a credit to the exchange program. She declined every interview. She attended the meetings because she had to, answered their questions with as few words as possible, and returned to her studies. In the dining hall, nobody moved away from her anymore. A space cleared for her at the center tables, the seats reserved for the Academy's top-ranked students. She sat there once, surrounded by curious, respectful faces, ate her meal in silence, and never sat there again. She went back to her corner table alone, where she could see every exit. Some habits were older than pride. It was Selith who finally cracked through the wall. 3 nights after the demonstration, Kira was sitting in their dormitory, reading a tactical analysis on her datapad. Selith sat on her own pod, pretending to study, watching Kira from the corner of her eye. The human girl had barely spoken since the match. She ate, she studied, she trained. She functioned. But something was wound tight inside her, and Selith could see it in the way Kira's hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. "You do not have to be strong right now," Selith said softly. "Not in here, not with me." Kira did not look up. "I am fine." "You are not fine. You just fought the creature who killed your mother in front of 3,000 people, and you won. That is not something a person walks away from and feels fine." Kira's hand stopped moving on the datapad. She stared at the screen, but she was not reading anymore. Her jaw was tight. Her shoulders were rigid. She looked like a wire stretched to its limit. "I did not know if I would win," she said. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a breath. "I studied him for 6 weeks. I knew every weakness, every limitation, every flaw in his technique. But when I stepped onto that floor and looked up at him, all that armor, all that size, all that history, I thought." She stopped, swallowed. "I thought about my mother standing at that wall, looking at the same thing, knowing she was not going to survive." Seleth said nothing. She waited. "I was not afraid of being hurt," Kira said. "I was afraid of failing her, of standing where she stood and falling the same way, of proving them right that we are soft, that we break, that we are nothing." A tear ran down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, angrily, as if it had betrayed her. Seleth crossed the small room. She sat beside Kira on the pod and wrapped all four of her arms around her. It was an awkward embrace. Seleth's body was not built the same way, and the angles were wrong, but Kira leaned into it anyway, and for a few minutes she let the wall come down. "You did not fail anyone," Seleth said. "You did not fail her." The next evening, Dorvac came to the dormitory. He filled the doorway like a boulder and had to duck his head to enter. He carried something in his massive hands, a small, smooth stone, dark gray, with a single word carved into its surface in careful, angular script. "This is a memory stone," he said. "My people give them to those we consider family. I carved the word myself. It is in your language." He held it out to Kira. She took it. The stone was warm from his hands, heavy and smooth. The word carved into it was simple: "Endure." Kira looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Dorvac, and for the first time since she had arrived on Station Valith 9, she smiled. It was small and tired and real. "Thank you," she said. It was the most emotion anyone had ever heard in her voice. The political changes came faster than anyone expected. Earth's provisional seat on the Galactic Concord was upgraded to full membership within 2 weeks. The single-student limit at the Academy was lifted by unanimous vote. The Concord's diplomatic office issued a formal statement recognizing humanity as a species of significant strategic and cultural value, bureaucratic language that meant, in plain terms, we were wrong about them. On the first day of the next semester, 14 human students arrived at Station Valith 9. They came from every continent on Earth, from cities and farms, from mountains and coastlines, from places where the air was thin, and places where the rain never stopped. They walked through the docking bay with their heads up and their eyes open, and not a single student moved to block their path. Kira met them at the registration desk. She did not give a speech. She did not offer advice. She handed each of them a data card, dormitory assignment, class schedule, station map, and said simply, "Welcome. You are going to do well here." One of the new students, a boy from Lagos with bright eyes and nervous hands, looked at her and said, "Are you Kira Vasquez, the one from the video?" "I am Kira," she said. "The rest does not matter." On the far side of the station, in a small holding room near the transport docks, Vreth Kaelser sat alone. His ceremonial gear was gone. His combat decorations were gone. His rank insignia had been removed, leaving bare patches on his chiton where the metal pins had once sat. He stared out the viewport at the stars, waiting for the ship that would carry him to his tribunal. A young Krethani officer entered to deliver transport documents. He hesitated at the door, studying the fallen instructor with a mix of awe and unease. "Sir," the young officer said, "may I ask you something?" Vreth did not look away from the viewport. "Ask." "What was it like, fighting the human?" Vreth was silent for a long time. The stars moved slowly past the glass, cold, distant, indifferent to the small dramas of small creatures. "I have fought across 12 systems," he said finally. "I have killed soldiers from 9 species. I have been wounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. I have faced death more times than I can count." He paused. His throat markings, once golden and proud, flickered a dull, exhausted gray. "But I have never been hunted before." The young officer frowned. "Hunted?" "She did not fight me," Vreth said. "That is what I did not understand. I thought she was fighting. I thought she was reacting, defending, surviving. But she was not doing any of those things." He turned from the viewport and looked at the young officer with eyes that had seen something they could not forget. She was hunting me. From the first day she walked into my classroom, she was hunting me, and I did not know it until I was already on the ground. He turned back to the stars. "Do not underestimate humans," he said quietly. "They are not what we thought they were. They are not what anyone thought they were." That night Kira sat in her dormitory pod. The room was quiet. Selith was asleep, her bioluminescent patches dimmed to a soft, rhythmic pulse. The memory stone from Dorvac sat on the shelf beside the holographic photo of Elena Vasquez. Kira's datapad glowed softly in her lap. On the screen was the Academy's student roster for the new semester. 14 new names under the species designation, Human, Earth. She looked at the names. Then she looked at her mother's photo, the tired smile, the worn armor, the eyes that had seen too much and still believed in something worth protecting. "We are here, Mom," Kira whispered, "and we are not going anywhere." She turned off the datapad. She lay back in her pod and closed her eyes. Outside the viewport, Station Valeth 9 turned slowly against the endless black, and beyond it, far away but growing closer with every passing day, a small blue planet spun in the light of its star, scarred, wild, dangerous, and alive. A Deathworld, a cradle of hunters, home. And the galaxy was finally beginning to understand what that meant.